My parents called me a failure. Now they work for me. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The paper felt heavier than it should. Maybe it was just the weight of everything it represented. My pen hovered for a moment before I signed my name. Bold, deliberate strokes, and slid the paycheck across the polished desk. Here you go, Mom, Dad. They sat across from me, in the same chairs where clients and employees sat every day, but the look in their eyes wasn't gratitude. It was a cocktail of pride swallowed whole by resentment. My mother's lips tightened into the same thin line she used when she was about to tell me I'd never amount to anything. My father avoided my gaze entirely, pretending to study the office decor. As they each took the envelope, I couldn't stop the flashbacks. Late nights at the dinner table where my report card was dissected like a forensic case file. "You'll never be as smart as your brother," my father would say, his voice dripping with certainty. "Just get a normal job before you starve," my mother would add, shaking her head like she'd already buried me in failure. I remembered the day they told me to leave. The cold February morning, my suitcase sitting by the door before I'd even had breakfast. No goodbye hug. No good luck. Just a curt, "You need to figure your life out. We're done supporting dead weight." I had figured it out. And now here they were, dressed in the company polos with my logo on the chest. Here, because I had the power to hire them. Dad finally looked at me. "You know, you could have just helped us out without all this," he said, gesturing to the office around us. I smiled, not kindly. "Oh, I am helping you out. This is me being generous." Before they could reply, there was a knock at the door. My assistant peeked in. "There's a reporter here for your interview about the self-made CEO who hired his parents." I watched the color drain from their faces. "Send them in," I said, because the world was about to hear everything. I was 22 when my parents decided they'd had enough of me. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where most families were making pancakes and reading the paper. Mine was standing in the living room, glaring at me like I'd just committed a crime. "Sit down," my dad ordered. He was still in his church clothes, tie knotted so tight it looked like it was choking him. My mom stood behind him, arms crossed, her mouth twisted in that way she did when she thought she was being tough love supportive. "You've been out of college for a year," Dad began, "and you're still working at that cafe. No savings. No real plan. You need to face facts. You're not going anywhere." The words hit like a punch, but I tried to laugh it off. "It's just temporary. I'm working on something." "Working on nothing," Mom cut in. "You're 22, living under our roof, wasting time on those ideas. You need a real job, something stable, like your brother. Or Jessica next door. She's already a nurse." I felt my stomach twist. "I'm not Jessica, and I'm not Mark. I'm me." Dad's eyes hardened. "And you is a failure. We can't keep enabling this. You have 2 weeks to move out." Actually, he glanced at Mom, who nodded. "Make it today." It was winter. My breath fogged in the cold as I dragged my suitcase down the front steps, the wind biting at my cheeks. They didn't even watch me leave. The door shut behind me before I reached the sidewalk. That night, I slept on my friend Kyle's couch, staring at the ceiling until sunrise. My phone buzzed once, a text from Mom. "When you finally grow up, maybe we'll talk." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night I started planning the life that would put me on the other side of that desk and make them answer to me. And the first person to believe in me? Well, they weren't exactly who I expected, and they had their own reasons for helping me. Kyle wasn't exactly the poster child for stability. He was loud, sarcastic, and the kind of guy who could talk his way out of, or into, almost anything. But that night, when I showed up on his doorstep with a half-frozen suitcase and a hollow look in my eyes, he didn't ask questions. He just stepped aside and said, "Couch is yours. Try not to die in your sleep. I don't want the landlord asking questions." Over the next few days, I worked shifts at the cafe like nothing had changed, but inside, I was unraveling. Every coffee I poured, every table I wiped, I heard their voices. "You're a failure. You'll never make it." One night, as I was scrolling through job listings that made me want to gouge my eyes out, Kyle walked in with a pizza and a bottle of cheap whiskey. "You ever think about working for yourself?" he asked, mouth full of cheese. I snorted. "Yeah, every time I realize I don't have the money to even buy myself dinner." But he didn't laugh. Instead, he reached into his jacket and tossed something on the table, a crumpled flyer. It was for a small business workshop downtown. I was gonna go, but I don't have the patience for that crap. You've got the stubborn streak for it. I almost dismissed it. But something about the word business sparked the tiniest flicker in me. That flicker grew when Kyle said, "Look, I know your folks are jerks. Prove 'em wrong. Hell, if you get rich, maybe hire them and make 'em scrub toilets." It was meant as a joke, but the idea lodged itself in my brain and refused to leave. The next morning, I was standing in a cramped community center surrounded by strangers and a whiteboard full of possibilities. The speaker talked about risk, vision, and starting with nothing. I took notes like my life depended on it. By the end of the day, I had the bones of an idea. And someone in that room noticed me, someone whose name I wouldn't forget because they were about to change everything. Her name was Claire Townsend, and she was the kind of woman who owned every room she walked into. While the rest of us scribbled notes in dollar store notebooks, she leaned back in her chair, watching the speaker like she'd heard it all before. Which, as it turned out, she had. I first noticed her when she caught me muttering under my breath about the example the speaker was using. "That won't work in real life," I'd said without realizing anyone could hear me. She smirked. "You're right," she whispered. "That guy's never built anything from scratch. You thinking of starting something?" I hesitated. "I have an idea. It's rough." She extended her hand. "Claire, I invest in rough ideas. Come by my office tomorrow, if you're not afraid to hear the truth." The next day, I almost didn't go. Part of me thought it was a scam. Part of me thought I'd embarrass myself. But Kyle practically shoved me out the door. Claire's office was nothing like I expected. No skyscraper views, no chrome furniture, just a converted loft with half-finished projects scattered everywhere. She listened as I laid out my concept, a niche service for small businesses that would save them time and money in ways the big guys ignored. When I finished, she didn't smile. "Your idea's good. Your plan? Trash. You'll fail in 6 months if you try it like this." My stomach dropped, but she wasn't done. "Lucky for you. I like people with a chip on their shoulder. And you." She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Have a whole damn brick wall. I'll give you a small investment and guidance, but you're going to work like you've never worked before. You in?" I thought about my parents' faces, the cold February morning, the door closing in my face. "I'm in," I said. Claire grinned. "Good. Let's make them eat their words." Neither of us knew it then, but this was the first step toward the empire that would bring my parents crawling back to me. And the first step toward a betrayal I never saw coming. Claire wasn't kidding when she said I'd work like never before. My days blurred together. Mornings spent cold calling businesses that hung up on me. Afternoons building a service platform on a laptop that overheated if I opened more than 2 tabs. Nights learning marketing from free YouTube tutorials until my eyes burned. Kyle joked that he never saw me anymore unless he brought food to my desk. He wasn't wrong. I lived off ramen, coffee, and spite. Every no I heard became fuel. Every hang-up, every rejection, I filed them away next to my parents' voices like ammunition. Claire pushed me harder than anyone ever had. If I missed a deadline by an hour, she'd tear into me. If I pitched without confidence, she'd make me start over. "You want to run an empire?" she'd say. "Act like the ruler, not the servant." Slowly, the tide began to turn. A bakery owner took a chance on my service. Then a small printing company. Word spread. My first month's revenue barely covered rent, but the second doubled, and the third. I actually paid myself a little. I still remember the first time I saw my parents after moving out. It was at the grocery store. Mom's cart was half empty, her face drawn. Dad looked older, tired. They spotted me and froze. "Still working at that cafe?" Dad asked, his tone half curious, half condescending. I smiled. "Nope. Running my own business now." Mom scoffed. "We'll see how long that lasts." I walked away before I could say something I'd regret. But inside, I promised myself I'd make it last and grow so big they couldn't ignore me. And as my client list grew, Claire started introducing me to bigger players. That's when I met someone who would open doors I didn't even know existed and who'd later try to slam them shut in my face. His name was Daniel Cross, a polished, silver-tongued businessman with a handshake that lingered just a second too long, like he was already sizing up your worth. Claire introduced us over lunch at an upscale restaurant I couldn't have afforded on my own. "Daniel works with mid-sized companies," Claire said, "the kind you need to break into if you want to scale fast." Daniel smiled. "Claire speaks highly of you. Says you've got grit." "I like grit. It's rare." We talked numbers, growth potential, market gaps. He listened intently, nodding at the right moments, and then leaned in. I can get you meetings with 5 companies that could triple your revenue overnight. But you'll need to deliver, no excuses. It felt like a golden ticket. I shook his hand, sealing the deal before the check even came. Over the next 2 months, Daniel made good on his promise. I was suddenly pitching to boardrooms instead of backrooms, closing contracts that made my early clients look like pocket change. My revenue curve shot up so fast it didn't feel real. But Daniel wasn't doing this out of charity. He started dropping hints about future equity and long-term partnerships. Claire warned me quietly, "Don't give him more than you have to. He's a closer, for himself first, everyone else second." I brushed it off. I was too busy riding the high of growth, too convinced I was finally untouchable. Then one night, as I was leaving the office, I caught the tail end of a conversation in the parking lot. Daniel was on the phone, pacing by his car, saying my name. Yeah, the kid's desperate for approval. Parents kicked him out, chip on his shoulder a mile wide. We can leverage that. He'll sign anything if we dangle the right bait. My stomach dropped. The golden ticket suddenly looked like a trap, and I had no idea how deep into his game I'd already fallen. From that night on, I couldn't look at Daniel the same way. His smile felt like a hook, and every favor came with invisible strings. But the problem was, I needed him. His connections were pouring fuel on my business, and without that momentum, I wasn't sure I could keep up the pace I'd built. So I played along. I let him introduce me to his network, sat through dinners where he bragged about his protege, and accepted contracts he negotiated on my behalf, even when the terms weren't exactly in my favor. Claire's warnings echoed in my head, but I told myself it was temporary. Meanwhile, the company exploded. We moved from the tiny shared office into our own floor in a downtown building. I hired staff. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something unstoppable. Then came Daniel's first real ask. "I've got an investment opportunity," he said one morning over coffee in my office. "It's a side project. You put in 50 grand, you get your money back in 3 months, with interest." 50 grand was more than I'd ever personally spent on anything. "What's the project?" I asked. He smirked. "Trust me, kid. You don't want the details, you want the results." Something about that made my stomach twist. But Daniel had a way of talking that made you feel stupid for doubting him. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That was the same week I got an unexpected email from my father. Short and cold. "Your mother and I need to talk. It's about work." I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. After all these years, they weren't reaching out to apologize. They were reaching out because they needed something. And I was in the perfect position to decide whether to give it or make them beg. They didn't even call ahead. One Monday morning, my receptionist buzzed me and said, "There's a Mr. and Mrs. Carter here to see you. They said you're their son." For a second, I thought it was a joke. Then I saw them. My mother in a worn blazer that didn't quite fit, my father with lines etched deeper into his face than I remembered. They looked smaller somehow. "Can we talk?" Dad asked, not meeting my eyes. I let them into my office, closing the door behind us. They stood there awkwardly, scanning the space, the glass walls, the view of the city, the awards on the shelf, like they'd stepped into another world. My world. Mom cleared her throat. "Your father got laid off. I left my job last month. Things have been hard." "And?" I asked, my voice flat. "We heard you might be hiring," Dad said, forcing the words out like they burned his tongue. The silence stretched. Years of insults and dismissals flooded back. "You'll never make it. We're wasting our time on you. You should be more like your brother." Now here they were, standing in my office, asking me for a chance. "What makes you think you're qualified to work here?" I asked. Mom blinked. "We're your parents." I leaned back in my chair. "You were my parents when you threw me out in the middle of winter. This is business. So, tell me why I should hire you." They shifted uncomfortably, fumbling through answers about their experience and work ethic. I listened, not because I needed their skills, but because I wanted to hear them squirm. Finally, I said, "I'll think about it." But as they left, Dad muttered under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear, "Still playing games, huh? Some things never change." I smiled to myself. He had no idea just how much the game was about to change. I didn't hire them right away. I let them stew for a week, knowing each day without work would chip away at their pride. When I finally called, My tone was all business. I've reviewed your applications, I said, drawing out the pause, and I can offer you positions. Entry level. There was silence on the line. Then Mom asked, entry level? After everything we've done. After everything you've done? I cut in. This is me being generous. Dad's voice was tight. What's the pay? I quoted a figure just above minimum wage. Enough to keep them afloat, but far from comfortable. They both hesitated, but eventually agreed. Their first day was glorious. I made sure they arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, only to have them sit through a full hour of HR orientation like any new hire. I assigned Dad to the logistics department, reporting to a manager 10 years younger than him. Mom went to customer service, taking calls from clients she'd once have dismissed as beneath her. The looks on their faces said it all. This wasn't the triumphant reunion they'd imagined. This was work. For me, I kept my interactions strictly professional. No family talk, no nostalgia. If they missed a deadline or made an error, I called it out in front of their peers, just like they'd done to me my whole life. But I wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. I wanted them to understand, to feel what it was like to be treated as less than, to claw for approval and never quite get it. One afternoon, I passed Dad in the break room. He was scrubbing a coffee spill from the counter. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw something new in his expression. Not anger, not defiance, something closer to fear. That's when I knew I had all the leverage. And I was about to use it, because Daniel's little investment was starting to look like a disaster, and I needed people I could control completely. Daniel's investment was unraveling fast. The promised 3-month return came and went without a cent. Every time I asked for answers, he fed me vague reassurances. Just a little delay, he'd say with that easy grin. But the tension in his eyes told another story. The problem? I'd sunk more money into it than I should have. Money I needed to keep the business stable. If this collapsed, I'd be scrambling for cash. That's when an idea took root. A risky one. The next morning, I called my parents into my office. They stood side by side, still awkward in their company polos. I have an opportunity for you, I began. A way to make more than you're making now. But it'll require trust. Dad narrowed his eyes. What kind of opportunity? I slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents Daniel had given me for the side project. I explained it in broad strokes, leaving out the part where I wasn't sure it was even legal. All you need to do is handle some of the operations. It's basic work, but crucial. Mom frowned. Why us? I smiled thinly. Because I need people I can rely on. People who owe me. They exchanged a look. I could see the hesitation, but the lure of higher pay, and maybe the desperation they tried so hard to hide, was too strong. Fine, Dad said at last. We'll do it. As they left, Claire stepped into my office. You're dragging them into this? She hissed. If this blows up, they'll take the fall before Daniel does, and maybe before you do. I met her glare evenly. Exactly, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one at the mercy of my parents. And if Daniel thought he could play me, he was about to learn I'd play dirtier. It started with a phone call from an unknown number. My father answered it in the logistics office, his voice casual at first, until it wasn't. I watched from my doorway as his face drained of color. He hung up without a word and walked straight past me without making eye contact. An hour later, Mom stormed into my office. What exactly did you get us into? She demanded, slamming the door behind her. I leaned back in my chair. Why don't you tell me what you mean? That call was from some investigator, she hissed, asking questions about shipments, invoices, dates, things that don't match what's on our reports. I didn't flinch, then answer them carefully. Her eyes went wide. You knew? Before I could respond, Claire barged in, shutting the blinds. Daniel's project is dirty, she said bluntly, and it's starting to smell bad enough that regulators are sniffing around. Dad appeared in the doorway, his voice low but urgent. We're not going down for this, you hear me? If this blows up, you clean it up. I stood, walking around the desk until I was inches from him. Funny, I said softly. That's exactly what I thought the night you kicked me out. Only difference is, now I hold the keys. He glared at me, but I saw the crack, the realization that his fate wasn't in his hands anymore. That afternoon, Daniel called. We might have to shift some blame if things get messy, he said casually. Good thing you've got a couple of expendable employees. I stared at the phone, my jaw tightening. He wasn't subtle. He was telling me to throw my parents under the bus. The question was, would I? The next week was chaos. Investigators started visiting the office in person, asking for files, emails, shipment records. My staff whispered in hallways, and every time the front desk phone rang, I saw my parents flinch. Daniel, of course, was calm as ever. "We just need to manage the narrative," he told me over lunch like we were discussing a marketing campaign. "If we make it look like a couple of mid-level employees cut corners, the rest of us walk away clean." I knew exactly which mid-level employees he meant. That night, I stayed late at the office. The city outside my window glowed, but my desk was buried in folders and spreadsheets, the kind of evidence that could clear me or bury my parents. My hand hovered over the shredder. Claire walked in quietly, setting down 2 coffees. "So, are you going to do it?" I didn't answer. She sat across from me. "I'm not here to give you a morality lecture. But remember this. If you save them, it's not because they deserve it. It's because you do." I thought about the cold February morning, the way the door slammed behind me. I thought about the text from my mother. "When you finally grow up, maybe we'll talk." And now here they were, terrified, cornered in my world. The power felt intoxicating. But there was a part of me, small, buried deep, that wondered if I was about to cross a line I couldn't come back from. The next morning, I called Daniel. "I've made my decision," I told him. His chuckle was low and satisfied. "I knew you would." But he had no idea that my decision wasn't what he thought. I spent the next 48 hours building my trap. Daniel thought he was pulling my strings, but he'd forgotten one thing. I'd built this company from nothing. I knew every crack in its walls, every shortcut in its wiring, and I knew exactly where to cut without collapsing it on myself. First, I pulled the incriminating files from my parents' access, replaced them with a carefully curated trail, one that pointed directly to Daniel. The dates lined up too neatly, the signatures matched his handwriting, the authorizations came from his personal email account. Then, I called a meeting with the investigators. "I'm as shocked as you are," I told them, sliding the files across the table. "But I can't ignore the evidence. I've also taken the liberty of compiling transaction histories, phone logs, and a list of off-site meetings he never disclosed." They took the bait. Hard. Meanwhile, I called my parents into my office. They were pale, exhausted, shadows of their former selves. I dropped a folder on the desk. Inside were clean records, the ones that cleared them entirely. "You're safe?" I said simply. Dad frowned. "Why?" "Because," I said, meeting his eyes, "I don't need to destroy you to win. I just need you to know I could." 2 days later, Daniel was escorted out of the building by security while the investigators took statements. His smug confidence was gone, replaced by a glare that promised this wasn't over. As the elevator doors closed on him, Mom whispered, "What happens now?" I smiled. "Now? We get back to work." But in the back of my mind, I knew this victory was just the opening act. Daniel wasn't the type to vanish quietly, and when he came back, he'd be aiming straight for me. It didn't take long. 2 weeks after Daniel's very public exit, an email landed in my inbox. No greeting, no signature, just a single sentence and an attachment. "Thought you'd like to know what I've been working on." The attachment was a draft article, clearly meant for a major business blog. The headline made my stomach clench. "The Dark Side of a Self-Made CEO: How Power, Pride, and Family Collide." The piece was a hit job in progress, weaving half-truths and twisted facts into a damning narrative. It painted me as a ruthless manipulator who built my success on exploiting vulnerable family members and running questionable side deals. The unnamed sources? I had no doubt Daniel had dug around my past employees, maybe even some old friends. I forwarded it to Claire. 10 minutes later, she called. "If this gets published, you're going to have more than PR cleanup. You could lose contracts. Investors might pull out." I paced the length of my office. "He's bluffing, trying to rattle me." "Maybe," she said, "but Daniel's not the bluffing type. He's the nuclear option type." The next morning, my parents showed up before work. Mom held a printout of the draft article. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. I met her gaze. "Parts of it are strategic storytelling. You know that." Dad's eyes narrowed. "He's coming for you. For us." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. If Daniel went public, my parents' names would be dragged through the mud, too. They might hate me, but they weren't ready for that kind of fallout. "Then we do what we always should have," I said. "We fight back." Together. Dad crossed his arms. And how exactly do we do that? I looked at both of them. By giving Daniel a taste of his own medicine. And I know exactly where to hit him. Because Daniel's empire had cracks of its own, and I was about to blow them wide open. Daniel's empire wasn't as bulletproof as he liked to pretend. Claire had warned me months ago. His success was built on favors, half-legal deals, and a trail of burned bridges. All I had to do was find the right cracks and apply pressure. With my parents now reluctantly in my corner, we split the work. Dad still had contacts in logistics who'd dealt with Daniel before. Mom knew exactly how to dig through public records without raising flags. Claire provided the final piece, a name. Daniel's silent partner, someone who'd been itching for an excuse to cut ties. We moved fast. Within a week, I had a file thick enough to bury him. Fraudulent contracts, falsified invoices, even proof he'd siphoned funds from one of his own projects. It wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was the kind of evidence that sent people to court. The day we made our move, I invited Daniel to talk. We met in the same upscale restaurant where we'd first shaken hands. He looked smug, certain I was there to beg. "You think you've got me on the ropes," he said, swirling his drink. I slid the folder across the table. "No, I've got you in checkmate." He flipped through the pages, and I watched the color drain from his face. "You wouldn't." "Already have," I cut in. "Copies are with my lawyer, Claire, and 3 reporters who'll run it if you so much as sneeze in my direction again." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" I smiled. "Nothing. Just disappear." And he did. By the end of the week, his offices were empty, his name scrubbed from the industry. Back at my company, I handed my parents their paychecks, the same way I had on their first day. But this time, they didn't look resentful. Just humbled. Dad cleared his throat. "You didn't have to protect us." "I know," I said. "But I'm not you." For the first time, Mom smiled faintly. "Maybe we were wrong about you." "Not maybe," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Definitely." And as they left my office, I realized the truth. Revenge felt good, but proving them wrong felt even better.